This presentation is done by Dr. Timothy Ewest, or Tim, and it's using narrative approaches to find meaning in work. Application. There's an application of Frankl's Logotherapy to career coaching. That's the title, and really it's focusing on one aspect of Frankl's work, which is the Socratic method or Socratic dialogue. Basically, the presentation roughly goes into truncated presentation goes into kind of three parts. The first is looking at the construction of the meta narrative, or really should say a meta narrative. It's not the only meta narrative in culture. Some of the effects of that on people, some of the responses from, and again, this does focus on the workplace. So some of the responses from the workplace, for those direct responses in the workplace. We'll look at just a few of those, and then we'll look at a broader perspective, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, which is kind of Frankl's perspective on meta narratives and the meta narrative that, um, or meta narratives he would suggest. We'll look specifically at one of his techniques, the techniques that he uses, which I mentioned already, the Socratic method, and then a few applications of that method. Again, this is one of the meta narratives in culture that I'll be talking about, and there are other existing meta narratives, even some specific to the workplace. But this has been the one that we're going to construct here. Meta narrative again is this perspective that says it's a narrative that has been agreed upon by a number of individuals. And this narrative is something that provides meaning uh, for those in society as a whole. The foundations of you know the kind of the constructivist paradigm go back into sociology, and those would be worth talking about, but not not within the scope of our time. But basically, the meta narrative that many people um, may not even be aware of, but many people choose to define their lives by. This gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, his name is Charles Taylor. I'm sure you're familiar with his work, Canadian philosopher. And he's done a lot of work around religion and society, morality, understandings of the self. And he would basically say, coming out of the or into the modern period, what happened with or a byproduct of coming out of mercantilism and kind of the enchanted world. And I'm borrowing enchanted from Max Weber and Tocqueville, where they would say that the world was enchanted. There are angels everywhere, and largely this was a mercantile or feudal system that really preserved the sovereignty as given by God. And coming out of the modern, coming into the modern area, one of the products or byproducts has been is that people have, because of the collapse of the enchanted world and because of the collapse of economic systems, really, like mercantilism, feudalism, which really predicted what people should be doing and how they should be doing it and how they're connected, answering fundamental questions about who people are and where they belong. Right, that's like social identity theory has a lot of gives a lot of consideration to those two questions. Taylor said that people really had this existential malaise where they couldn't figure out what what they should be doing, that the choice that they could become who they wanted to become. That really obviously would raise the question in a person's mind, well, who do I want to become, and then therefore who am I? And it was not there was a lot of uncertainty. And so he said one of the things that fundamentally was in the culture because of free market economics, use of utilitarian perspective. And if you look at the work of Adam Smith, he borrowed from a number of the utilitarian philosophers at the time, who suggested that that what was important is that we make our choices in reference to some type of utility. Um, Smith used the term homo economist, referring to a man making rational decisions based on cost and benefit. And so Taylor's suggesting that while the modern focus on rationality, the modern focus on the mind and on naturalism, that is what exists is there, was also really kind of enhanced or pushed forward by this utilitarian perspective in economics, this homo economist perspective in economics, which really pushes the person into this homo economist rational decision making at the margin, cost benefit. What gives my life the greatest utility? What gives my life the greatest impact? Based on what I have, how can I maximize its utility? And there was a lot of consternation by people when they had to consider that. And while Gabriel Marcel, just below Taylor in the lower left, and Jacques Ellul in the right, their work predates that of Taylor. Taylor's work is still ongoing, and it's obviously later. Marcel and Ellul are not contemporaries of Taylor per se. So, but in terms of history, that's what Taylor's suggesting happened. Ellul, who precedes Taylor's work in the bottom left-hand corner, and Marcel in the bottom left-hand corner, Ellul is in the corner right there. They would just say that what happened then is that this demand for efficiency, especially in the work of Marcel, showed up in the desire for technique. And technique was not, or the technical is not something that's necessarily mechanical or electronic. It's just a value, a deep value within culture that really desires, that asks the person to consider their life in terms of what would ease the amount of suffering. What can they do to create the most effectiveness and efficiency really in their life to ease suffering? It's done in a way where the person has to reflect on the self, because the assumption is they're very disconnected from who they are and where they belong. So the meta narrative in short for them is basically suggesting something to the effect that we are having to make our own way. Who we are and where we belong is really a question for us to solve. But one of the predominant mechanisms in culture is that we would make choices that maximize our utility. We'd make choices that maximize our utility in a way that which they refer to as technique. We look for, when we do this, we're using techniques to ease suffering. And obviously in regards to work can be understood in such a frame where it does engender suffering. It does engender it does have this obligation to it in some cases. The focus on the individual trying to create efficiency or using technique to ease suffering, maximizing utility. There's a number of ways you can put in a frame. Weber talked about it Max Weber talked about in regard to specialization, that the individual needed to specialize. It was almost as if through specialization that you would create efficiencies. Weber's work demonstrated this again and again, at least economically. So the individual in the inter-economic life, Gabriel Marcel and Ellul, Taylor are suggesting that they had to have these, utilitarian, efficient decisions to maximize the impact of their life, and that was done largely. I mean, it was considered largely a type of specialization, and this is what created deep bifurcations in the individual, both from within themselves, but also Wendell Berry, the bottom left-hand corner, said that it created specialization, created a division between the person and the environment. The person no longer knew because of specialization, which is a form of technique. Marcel, a form of Marcel's technique, right? That the individual just no longer was connected to the environment around them or community because they were focusing on the one thing that would maximize their utility. So like he would say, and in his writings he has some questions, or he points to some outstanding questions that people in the workplace have where they don't understand where something has come from or the cost or at what cost. So they don't really think about how much they consume or even what it is to consume because they are in a sense focused on the one thing that can maximize their own utility. Putnam says that this shows up a lot in the degradation of social capital, where individuals are really focusing on their own utility, the maximization of their own utility to ease suffering, using that as technique, finding the right job, focusing on one specific thing, and really it creates a life that's isolated. Mary Parker Follett said that it completely degraded work, which is, I mean, all of these three things are carrying something in common, which is that the focus on technique, creating efficiencies through technique, or as a means to ease personal suffering, to maximize a person's utility. Follett would say actually even disconnects people from work because they're not focused on the work she would suggest that they're doing or how the work is connected to others. She really talked about the fact that people kind of become a ghost in the machine. They kind of go to work in a sense soulless. They leave their soul at the door and they're just simply trying to do the work to maximize the utility to ease their suffering. And they're just trying to they're focusing their goal, then their main goal is to maximize utility, not to master their work. I mean, to add to the narrative, uh, one of my favorites here is Rene Girard. And Girard said that when an individual begins to, um, you know, maximize their utility and has this focuses their gifts and talents on what gives them the maximum utility, he wouldn't disagree and say that Barry and Putnam and Follett are wrong. He would say that it does create disconnections between individuals. But what his focus is on that is to suggest something else, which says that in the narrative where people are embracing this narrative that is suggestive of trying to create maximum utility, that their desire for the ease of suffering becomes the goal, and they're not sure what to do with their own desires, and they begin to look at how others are their desire for a good life or desire to be full, and they look at others who are trying to maximize their utility, who are trying to trying to create through technique, trying to create an ease of life. Specifically, it seems through specialization. And he would say that when they see this, they begin to identify their desire for a good life as congruent to the desire that these other people have around them. And so the good life, what it means when they look at other individuals, well, the good life means that you have to maximize your life around these utilities that are directed, right? You try to maximize your life, use it the best, utilize it the best to ease suffering, and that's your specialization. And so you begin to mimic the behavior of others. This is where the meta narrative really comes into play, which is you begin through an individual who's desiring a good life, not sure what that means, and they look up and they look around at society, and then they begin to understand that what it means is generally based on what other people are suggesting it means. And what a good life means is to find jobs where you have deep specialization in something, where you can maximize your life to ease suffering, And even if it's at the cost of disconnection from family and the environment and others, uh, that part of the narrative you're even willing to embrace because that's what the good life means. And his theory, mimic theory, is suggesting that the individual, as they're questioning what the good life means, they have this conversation with culture, with larger culture, with culture at large, and they begin to mimic or imitate. And so you have this competitive nature, people comparing, looking at the ideals, and who they idolize, and the ideals of those who idolize or idealize individuals who do this well. In the modern workplace, specifically in psychological movements, both in psychoanalysis, counseling, but it's much broader. In fact, now in my discipline, you find that a significant amount of training is towards leadership dollars, and a significant amount of those dollars are actually for developing mindfulness in the workplace. Now, it would be unfair to say that the mindfulness movement in the workplace is solely dedicated just to addressing, the malaise created by, the existential dread of not knowing who you are and the seeking of efficiency. But some of the mindfulness movement is directed towards individuals who have very short attention spans and are not able to attend to things. And also, it's suggestive of the need for and the concern about developing EQ, emotional intelligence, in leaders. But another caveat or section to mindfulness movement is really trying to help people be present in the moment that they're in and not regard so much the meta narrative that's in culture, but the narrative that's unfolding around them. Mindfulness, I think, is having its day. I don't know if it's had its day, at least in the workplace, but I will say that the mindfulness training has decreased just in terms of percentage of dollars and activity. And the other one was management, spirituality, and religion, which I'm part of that academic guild in the Academy of Management. I sit as the research chair for that. And this actually makes all these considerations, and it does. You'd be happy to hear that it does ask some of the Franklian style questions, the logotherapy style questions, which is that refusing or refuting the Geist, the spirit of the age, or the Geist of culture, and trying to figure out what the personal individual, how they construct meaning as they engage with the world. And so both of these have had, I think, some success, ongoing success. I'm not sure to what extent they will continue or be around, but both of them, I think, are part of the larger, what I would refer to as moral economic movement from my guild, which is, starting back with moral sentiments and Weber, Tocqueville, and others who are asking today, Robert Withnow at Princeton, and others who are just asking questions like, what are the values, economic values, societal values that are attached to work and workers. Of course, there's an entirely another frame, which is coming from Frankl's work, and he would suggest, and I think it's not just his work, but others would suggest the same thing, that another existing narrative or a layer to the narrative would be that individuals have as a goal this homeostasis, or the state of pleasure or satisfaction, or the state or the desire for achievement, that they would will themselves to a type of success to demonstrate their abilities or skills. And then, of course, Frankl's perspective is very different, where as we meet life, life asks us, what does this mean? And we're responsible. We need to take responsibility in that moment to answer it. And through doing that, we can have pleasurable states or times, although, as we know, Frankl would suggest pleasure is elusive. And we can achieve, although achievement too is elusive. So there is this very interesting, I think, tie-in that Frankl brings to it, to the meta-narrative. And it's these other scholars are really pointing to the meaning that culture is constructing. And Frankl comes along and really asks, I think, the central question in all this, which is these are the narratives that culture has constructed, and from that we arrive at some type of meaning. And I would suggest to you that both the pleasure worldview or narrative or the achievement narrative are really align themselves well. They align themselves well with this understanding of easing of suffering or maximum utility. Easing of suffering to get to pleasurable states. I want to maximize myself so I can ease my suffering, and I'm going to find a job where I can maximize what I have, and I want to ease the suffering. That's the technique, to ease the suffering, so I can arrive at a pleasurable state. And really, it is the maybe these two play off of one another, because it is demonstrate. No, if I can do that, it demonstrates my achievement. I should be able to do this. And again, Frankl says, no, suggesting that those don't seem to be end states. The larger question is, the bigger question is what's the meaning that a person is living from and or into. So to whatever extent all of this is true, how would you help somebody, or how would I help myself, kind of uncover or expose this larger meta narrative and begin asking questions of meaning? And so I think this here from Walter fits very well. Socratic questions need to be asked in a way that stretches the thinking of the client or friend. This requires careful listening to find the circumstances of the client. If the question is entirely within the circumference, that is, like the person's experience or understanding, it will not have a stretching quality. If it is totally outside of the client's thought, he or she will not be able to connect with it. So the questions need to stand with one leg firmly in the client's way of looking at the world and the other in new territory. Now I'm going to add a third leg to this. That's why the stool is up there and the cat up in the corner. So I engage, and I'll show you 3 different ways I engage with individuals, both in the classroom and out of the classroom, in the classroom and then with coaching, using the Socratic technique. So I think there's this 3-legged stool, and one is what is known by the individual, right? That's firmly with what they know and within reality. What is unknown or possible? And again, I would still suggest that this, if you look at it in terms of Johari's window, it's more like what I know could be possible about them, but they wouldn't know it. And then there's a third leg of the stool, which is very important. So this is an addition. And that's something that neither I nor they know. It's a mystery. And I'm going to tell you here and then later as well that this became so important to me, because what would happen is that it would almost seem like if I could suggest something that to the person as I'm listening to their story, that could be an alternative narrative, which I think is where narrative therapy is. That could be help them re-story or reconstruct another narrative, add a layer to their narrative. It basically brings them to another fixing point where they're able to say, this is now how I need to think about myself, or I need to regard myself. And I don't think that's bad. I want to be clear on that. But I do think it's not the best. Frankl did a really good job at really trying to convince people that who you are is formative. And so I think in order for us to actually honor the real construction of who we are, which is that we're always forming, we're always becoming, we also need to honor the mystery. in narrative therapy, the suggestion, at least in my mind, that this is another way to look at that story, which is accurate and true and provides another layer of meaning, um, is not enough. It's suggestive that I can still look back at my narrative with another layer and something that's more significant that I can live into, and obviously it helps me to externalize if I'm having issues or problems, or if I've hung up, or if I'm limiting myself. That's again the Johari's window effect, where someone knows something about me that I don't know. But I would suggest that even then there's kind of a fixity to that, and someone will then begin to act, which is good, in congruency with a new narrative. But at the same time, there's still more to the person than that. That soulish evolving qualities still has not been addressed. So first place I use this is in moral identity theory. This is a classroom exercise that I do with undergraduate and graduate students. And basically the premise of the theory is the values that drive all of us, and these values inside of us drive us to look for societal roles and norms and opportunities that we kind of believe in life that represent like the best ideals of who we want to become, and or how we want to form our moral identity. So this is borrowing a little bit from like Fiske's work, Susan Fiske, and social identity theory, but this is from Augusto Blasi, is one of the predominant founders. And if you're interested, there's also books like Leadership Process and Follower Identity, which is a Routledge book by Lord and Brown. So there's a number of different resources out there that would point to this. So I mean the perspective would be is that the meta narrative, which creates alienation from culture, would really direct or drive one to a higher purpose and seeking out some moral ideal. This is we're picking up a little bit on Girard's work, where you try to imitate somebody. So you create a moral self or narrative and a moral identity because of that. And so we basically take time with each student in Socratic dialogue, and we help them begin to form some leaders or moral ideals, or people who they would think are exemplars, that resonate with some of the values in their life that they can begin to identify with. And the point would be is, again, that's that second leg, where they don't necessarily think they can be this person, but in fact that second leg is that we can see the second leg of the stool. We can kind of see in them how they like that and how they could live into that uniquely. It has a little bit of a Jungian overtone, which is there's these types that people are looking for, and so we're trying to help them find their own color to how they would live that. So the basic process, I alluded to it a little earlier, but you basically would take the values survey, which Shalom Schwartz, and then consider some virtues. We'd go through those, and then they would select individuals who represent those values or virtues in their life. And then this is where the Socratic part comes in, two legs of the stool at least. We'd help them envision those values and virtues in their own life. And one of the ways that we do that is we'd have them see how those virtues and values were modeled to them, and then help them delineate ways to do them. And that creates for them a moral identity, which really stretches them through the use of these Socratic means. It stretches their ability to see who they can become. So basically, who the person wants to become. In our case, our university is a Christian university, except we have students. In fact, we're more ethnically diverse than Houston, and Houston is actually more ethnically diverse than New York City. So we have a very diverse campus. We also have a very religiously diverse campus. So, but I use an example here from the Christian tradition, which is because it's my tradition. And so there are some representative ideals that I would have, and through conversation with individuals and through reading and through examining the virtues of these people, the values that they carry with them. And these three people, it would be Barnabas in the lower right-hand corner. He was the son of encouragement. He didn't want to take credit for stuff. I really like that. The up in the upper right-hand corner, he's part of the Purple People Eaters. So that's Alan Page. He's a judge. He was an All-American defensive end, but he also, when he left the Vikings, he went to law school and got his Juris Doctorate, practiced law, and then now is sitting on the Minnesota Supreme State Court. He is somebody who says that you don't have to be one thing. You can be many things. And I like that a lot. And then Ernest Shackleton was an explorer across the Antarctica for what reason I still don't know. But his ship ran aground and he saved all of his crewmen. He never gave up. He worked day by day, moment by moment, solved the problem in front of him. So I think that when an individual has these moral exemplars and they arrive at them through Socratic dialogue, they begin to really kind of pull back from the governing meta-narrative and they begin to construct their own narrative. A second tool we use is that from Croton School of Business. That's Noel Tishy in the lower right-hand corner. And they use this in training GE executives, and they believe that leaders who help organizations succeed are able to articulate their values and act on these values. And it gives them something they call leadership edge. It's being able to make tough yes and no decisions. And they believe that it comes from a person's story, like where you came from as an individual. So, where you are today or who you are today really comes from your identity, and that comes really from your past experiences. This is very much like Nikomation or Nikomacene, depending on the early Greek professor you had, Aristotle's understanding the golden mean, where you say yes and no because your life has taught you, your life has been an active lesson for you. And so you can already see where narrative therapy would work in this as well. There's a 5-part technique where you take your life, breaking into 3 to 5 year segments, depending on how old the person is. I'd have to go 5 years now. But with each segment, you describe the events in your life. And if it's a positive one, you write the event on a red Post-it note. If it's kind of neutral, you put it on the blue. And if it's positive, you put it on red. And then you put them into groups. And you basically ask yourself, so what did I learn? And again, this is where the Socratic, at least 2 legs of the stool, again, come into play. That is what they've experienced and what are some of the possible things they've experienced that they, necessarily wouldn't ground in reality. Although it happened, they may not totally frame it that way. And so through the Socratic, helping somebody, if you're aware of narrative therapy, it's a lot of it is just talking to somebody in a way that has a perspective of just simple curiosity. And at some point, the individual realizes that you're not trying to come to some conclusion for their life. And you, even though you've told them, let's see what's there and not try to figure out what's there. Let's not try to find something. Let's just go looking. Let's gather evidence from your life and not come to conclusions. I even say things like, and I think some of my Quaker, my participation in Quaker education was helpful because it's suggesting you need to let wisdom come or let truth emerge. I think that there's a lot of sense to that. So the first and second leg of the stool does a lot of that. It just basically is asking people, more questions, helping them, in the narrative therapy, they would refer to as externalizing, and that would just simply be by taking an observer position with the other individual and putting a lot of things in the third person and in a sense kind of objectifying some things, even though that can be a little bit unfair. It just kind of distance, but in any regard, it helps a person get a more robust picture of their life. And then from there, they can go to number 4, which is they can see there's some recurring themes or some significant experiences that they live through and that they have come to some conclusions and they appreciate about themselves. So this is just an example where in the timeline, someone would obviously, from being born to present day, they would have a number of different lived experiences. And some would be positive, some would be negative, but they'd be moving forward. And with each experience, they would be finding meaning or purpose from those experiences and some values. It's those derived meanings or purposes that basically create for the individual their leadership edge. And of course, in order to construct that, you have to have somebody who's willing to enter into kind of this exploratory dialogue. The last one is narrative coaching. And narrative coaching, I think, is the first one that incorporates all 3 legs of the stool. And it starts with asking the individual, what exists, what's happening, or what has happened to the individual. And this really, if you've practiced narrative therapy, narrative coaching, which is by a number of individuals. This is a picture of David Drake here. I think there's probably 3 or 4 scholars / practitioners who are working with this, but it is following really the narrative therapeutic approach where you really don't have objectives. You allow things to emerge. And again, this is where that's the 3-legged Socratic stool, 2-legged, but I've added a leg. And I think here, this is where all 3 legs are used. And I have one graphic at the end to kind of point to what I mean by all this. But basically, it's what is. The second question would be what if, and I think that's where the second leg of the stool comes in. And number 3 is what matters. And see, now I think that's the third step, and I think that's where the third leg of the stool comes in, because we can. There are things others can know about us that we don't know about ourselves, and they can help us emerge. They can help us find new meaning definition to our stories. But what's interesting is that that's not the ultimate meaning. So there are some larger shifts that occur kind of in the mysterion that we don't really, ultimately, we do not know that we are somebody who's designed to be constantly, as we move ahead, emerging and forming. This is again, and using narrative therapy as the backdrop. Drake uses a few other tools, including attachment theory, Bowlby's attachment theory, and I think it all works. I think he pulls them together in a way that helps. But for our purposes, in terms of coaching, this is the third thing I've used, kind of a derivation of Drake's work. And the idea would be is the first leg of the stool is showing the persona, the old self, what is known. The second leg of the stool is trying to help someone engage with that shadow or the new story. Externalizing the story, helping them understand the new meaning, helping them restory or helping them reconstruct their story. But I still think this third leg of the stool, even after that work is being done, is to still say, there's more to this and we don't know what that is. None of us know, but we're moving forward in it. So as we wrap up here, this is not a great graphic, but that's pretty good. I think that when techniques are used, that the first 2 I talked about were Blasi's moral identity theory, and the second one I talked about was Noel Tishy's leadership development. When people are looking for development and validation, I think the first 2 legs of the stool, what is known and what's possible, but obviously it was experienced and discovered. I think that's important. I think that those 2 legs of the stool belong firmly in validation and development. But I think when someone's looking for growth and change, all 3 legs of the stool need to be active. So it's kind of like saying that what's known is important. What's unknown and needs to kind of be revisited and reinterpreted. That's very important as well, and that helps us seek validation and development. What's unknown and unknowable, though, that's what opens us up to growth and change. I really think that when we help somebody just create a new story, and that new story is based on events that they had in their past that they're now able to look at in a different way and derive meaning from, I think that's very valuable. But I think the disposition it creates for people who are moving forward is that it doesn't allow them to understand that life is a matter of unfolding. It is a matter of looking at, as Rollo May would say, looking at the moment that's coming in front of you and not looking at it with anxiety, but looking at it with a sense of creativity. And that third leg of the stool does just that. Okay, I hope that you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or contact me. Thank you.